Well, let's talk about that, and particularly how it's affected tourism and foreign skills coming into the country.
South Africa spends or has spent since 1994 a great deal of resources in cabinet ministers flying around the world, encouraging investment to take place. Not only money, but foreign direct investment, clever investment, intelligent investment, and showcasing South Africa open for business. What everybody started forgetting, I suppose, since Dlamini Zuma's changes, was that South Africa has to remain open for business, open to foreigners, while balancing those interests with national security interests. It didn't do that very well. And what these amendments reflected was a knee-jerk reaction against security concerns against human trafficking and corruption, which created a balance on the complete opposite end of an open economy. And we are suffering the consequences now.
We were speaking off air, Gary, about these proposed overhauling of some of these regulations. What can you say about that?
Well, the devil is in the detail, and I would love to see the formulation of these new regulations when they're published. But the proposals not only come a little bit too late after so much damage has been done. To repair doesn't take a few weeks or a few months. It may take a few years to get back to where we were. With regard to some of the changes, for example, which have nothing to do with unabridged birth certificates, that's a red herring. But China is a big country, and South Africa's tourism was inflated with Chinese people, for example, and people coming from Russia and other visa-restricted countries. For these new amendments to force these individuals in their countries of origin to present themselves in person at very unfriendly South African missions to apply for entry visas ruined it. Air China decided not to fly to South Africa. And Chinese tourism only in the last year and a half dropped by perhaps more than 45%. So South Africa now wishes to repair that by making it easier for Chinese nationals to apply for visas by proxy, by going to some certified travel agencies and not to present themselves in person at South African missions in Shanghai and Beijing. Well, let's see whether that works. But there's a lot more to it than that. Many Chinese people, the way they do business, for example, they're very flexible. And many Chinese people always traditionally entered South Africa as visitors and then changed their status in country, depending on the circumstances. Nothing wrong with that. But our not regulations, our Immigration Act now prohibits a change of status. And many of them have rethought their plans to investing in South Africa and trying to live here. Applying for work visas and business visas for entrepreneurs has become almost impossible. So South Africa is no longer open for business in a practical sense.
Gary, finally on that note, we know South Africa has its own labour challenges, black economic empowerment, etc. There might be people out there that sort of have the perception that our government, these regulations seem slightly xenophobic. And how do you balance the labour challenges that we have with bringing in foreign skills? Why would you give a foreigner a job before a South African?
I think that cuts to the core of a very large immigration debate, a very important one. We can unpack that for a second. You talk about a labour issue. There's a high unemployment rate in South Africa. But then you look at empirical research that looks at per unit labour productivity. And it appears from research that has been recently completed by, for example, Professor Ferreira at UNISA, who's looked at this very carefully, that our labour productivity in this country has never been lower for the last 46 years. Now, to take an example, in order to obtain a general work visa, a very commonly used work visa traditionally, the Department of Labour has to issue a labour certification. The point is that the Department of Labour politically is militantly protective of South African labour market, generally speaking. It's almost impossible to obtain a favorable labor certification from the Department of Labor. And now you ask a question. Why does so much emphasis get placed on the Department of Labor, which effectively tries to protect a highly, highly unproductive labor market? This is a fantastic question, because it's not a result, it's not a consequence of empirical research. It's a result of the political machinations of the trade unions and of whatever happens at cabinet level. But it doesn't help our economy. Foreigners' research, international research has shown, even if you import, for example, Zimbabweans or Malawians, when they get here, they work harder than the local populace. They're far more productive. It's the same when poor Hispanics went to the United States, crossing the Rio Grande River, swimming across, wetbacks as they call them, far more productive than local American labor. And this is what has stimulated the American immigration debate. There have been amnesties giving illegal Hispanics American green cards. Why? Because the realization is when American native labor is so bad, foreigners coming there tend to work much harder. Why don't we follow international practice and begin to realize that? We can't sacrifice productivity and international competitiveness because it sounds better politically. It makes no sense.
Okay, Gary, thanks for your insight.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.